Hey everyone, I'm Scott, and today I want to talk to you about science.
Awesome. Hello, my anthropomorphic internet anomalies. In my travels through space-time, I happened across this gem of a video. It's called God, the Bible, and String Theory. In it, Scott will tell us how one field of quantum theory has led to the God conclusion. Spoiler alert, kids, I disagree. So let's get down to the sciencey bits.
Now, if you're a person of faith, when you hear the word science, it might be a little intimidating to you. And that's because maybe you've had a science professor or a high school science teacher who told you that science has disproven God.
There are so many things wrong with what you just said. First of all, who's telling kids that science has disproven God? I'm curious to know. Second, science generally isn't concerned with disproving anything. The scientific method, when applied, usually follows the order of formulate a question, form a hypothesis, make a prediction, test your hypothesis, analyze the results. It's a method of investigation, a process by which we can further and augment our collective knowledge. If people make the extraordinary claim that a God is real, then the burden of proof lies with them, not the scientific community. Science doesn't have to disprove your God. You have to prove it.
I want to show you today that that's not true, and I want to do that by talking about something called string theory.
Well, I do love talking about physics, so let's see how this wave function you call a video collapses.
Let's go back to your high school physics class. In that class, you were taught that everything in the universe is made up of atoms, and that those atoms are made up of protons and neutrons, and that those protons and neutrons are made up of little tiny things called quarks, and that's where your science textbook ended. It couldn't explain what's behind a quark. But there are a few theories out there, and probably the most prominent theory is called string theory or superstring theory. And string theory is trying to explain what is it behind quarks, what is the true building blocks of the universe, what is the microscopic world that we can't see but is out there and shapes our entire existence.
Actually, string theory isn't trying to explain what are behind quirks. In its earlier incarnations, it was an attempt to explain the strong nuclear force. After that didn't pan out, it was later adapted as a potential theory for quantum gravity. As the theory evolved from a more limited application to a more universal one, even establishing a correlation with quantum field theory, it became what we know of today as superstring theory, the creation of which also led to M-theory, which is a composite of several different superstring theories. History lesson aside, at the heart of string theory is the idea that point particles, specifically elementary particles like quarks, photons, and electrons, are not points at all, but in fact one-dimensional objects reminiscent of strings. Hence the name. The properties of the particles as we see them are determined by the vibrational state of these strings. The vibrations of said strings, which are affected by various theoretical dimensions, are translated to what we detect as particles' mass, charge, spin, and so on.
And string theory says that there are little vibrating bands of energy that are the building blocks of the universe. In fact, these little vibrating bands of energy actually look like little dancing strings. And that's really, if you see pictures of string theory, it's these little dancing strings that are super microscopic, smaller than quarks.
In string theory, quarks are strings.
And these are the true building blocks of our universe. And what string theorists like Brian Greene, who has a great TED Talk, if you are interested in learning more about string theory, you should go check out his TED Talk. It's excellent.
So on this point at least, we agree. Professor Brian Greene's TED Talk is excellent, and I recommend anyone interested in a well-presented introduction to string theory watch it. I'll leave a link for anyone wanting to watch an actual physicist describe theoretical physics.
But really what superstring theorists and string theorists are trying to do is they're trying to explain the 20 numbers that rule the world. You may not be aware of this, but there are about 20 very specific numbers in the universe that in some sense hold our universe together. Brian Greene talks about this in his TED Talk. These are numbers like the mass of particles, like electrons and neutrons, or the strength of gravity, or the electromagnetic force. These are very specific numbers. These are numbers that can be measured to a very specific degree. And just any little alteration on these numbers would change the very fabric of the universe. If neutrons were a slightly different size, the universe itself would unravel and would cease to exist as we know it. And so scientists have wondered for years, well, where do these numbers come from? How did these numbers come into existence? Why these numbers? Why these values?
Mathematics, the study of quantity, structure, space, and change, is a field of study founded on a man-made language of symbols and numerals. Using this language, mankind has tried to study the natural world and formulate consistent explanations of observed occurrences. When a mathematical expression is assigned to a real-world event, this is mankind's way of trying to quantify nature and experience. Physicists do this as well. Making conjectures based on the language of mathematics used to describe our universe is what modern physics strives to do. But people that are being intellectually honest will admit that the way any interpretation of quantum physics describes our reality is not necessarily how things really are. Science by design is less concerned with truth than it is with what's useful. And consistency is very useful. Also, I could cite the anthropic principle as a potential explanation for the miraculous existence of these so-called 20 numbers that rule the world, but I feel that dead horse has been sufficiently beaten.
I mean, it makes us think, where did these equations come from? Where did these numbers come from?
The equations came from people. Also, numbers.
And that's where faith comes back in to meet science. I find it really fascinating that there are 20, maybe 24 numbers that are very specific, and so specific that if they were altered a little bit, the universe would cease to exist. Now, what explains those numbers? Well, some people might say, well, it was just random chance. We just happened to get lucky enough that all 20 numbers hit. This is like the greatest lottery luck ever. All 20 of our numbers hit, and therefore the universe we live in works. That's one answer, but that is highly, highly, highly improbable.
If you find this explanation less than probable, and that is your reason for discounting it, describe the exact functions and equations you would use to determine the higher likelihood of God being the causal factor of the universe. I'll wait. It is interesting to me how you will claim probability as a factor for invalidating people's interpretation of evidence, but will see no issue in providing zero evidence whatsoever indicating why, or how, God is the most probable explanation of existence.
Other people, string theorists, some string theorists will say, well, we live in a universe actually of multiple universes, and there's like almost an infinite amount of universes, and we just happen to live in the one where all 20 numbers hit. And I would just say that, to me, that doesn't seem very likely, that we just happen to live in a world of multiple, infinite, multiple universes, and we exist in the one that worked out the right way.
Right. Again, that is one interpretation of quantum theory, and not even the most popular. The many worlds interpretation, which I can only assume is what you're referring to, is based on theories and evidence, but is quite unlikely to be proven or disproven, due to its very nature. In that way, and only that, it is similar to the problem of proving or disproving a deity. But again I ask, what makes the assertion you're gearing up for, the assertion of a personal God, the most likely answer? Or in any way more likely than the interpretations you have described, because at the very least, they seem to be conjectured based on evidence.
I think probably the best explanation and the best answer is that we live in a very finely tuned universe that was finely tuned by a personal force, what I would call God.
What evidence do you have for this so-called explanation? Well, as it turns out, someone else saw an issue with that point, in your comments section. And your response directed him to another one of your videos, entitled, Does God Exist?, where you illustrate your evidence, the 3 reasons why God has to be. Reason 1, the universe has a beginning. Reason 2, the universe is perfect for life. Reason 3, humans have an inner sense of right and wrong. First, even were I to acknowledge the universe as having a causal origin, it doesn't presume that it would need to be God. As far as the universe being perfect for life, well, at least in our remote part of space, the dice came up right for life to evolve. But in a cosmos so vast, that becomes more likely, and the cosmos is nothing if not big. Also, anthropic principle much? Third, an argument from a moral perspective is pretty weak. Many cultures have different interpretations of what is moral. Some are more universal. Certain moral imperatives like murder is bad appear in many different societies and groups. But that could just as easily be described as an extension of a biological imperative, like an organism's will to survive, as it could be ascribed to a god. So...
yeah, it's possible that we may have been correlating some things that weren't actually related at all. Help!
In fact, that's what Professor Kaku says. That's his conclusion. Take a look. To me, it is clear that we exist in a plan which is governed by rules that were created, shaped by a universal intelligence, and not by chance. This is fascinating. He's saying, look, when I look at the world, when I look at the universe as a physicist, what it tells me is that there is something out there that has created all of this, that has set this all up, that it's too complex, it's too finely tuned, it's too mathematically aligned and true for this just all to happen by chance. There is a creator out there. There is what we would call God.
the opinion of one physicist is not an admission of God from all of science. You are making an appeal to authority. One authority. Also, I noticed how he referred to a universal intelligence. Not your God.
I think that the science of string theory, even if it doesn't all hold true completely, that the science of string theory points us back to God.
I'm glad you think that. One question. Do you even know how to science, bro?
And so I think it's really true that good science, true science, brings us back to God.
What?
Good science, true science, brings us back to God.
I have no words.
And some of the most amazing, unbelievable breakthroughs in science and in physics and in all these fields of study aren't disproving God, but instead they're maybe showing us how really what was written in the Bible thousands of years ago might be really true in ways that we never, ever imagined.
You haven't shown one thing that indicates the Bible, in ways imagined or otherwise. I mean, I've read the book, and I don't recall any parts of Genesis where it says,
"And God set forth one-dimensional strings fluctuating through multiple dimensions, whereas the world would know them as point particles, and he saw that it was good."
but maybe you have a different copy. As for the rest of you, voyeurs from the internets, thank you for watching. It means a lot. I like making these videos, and hopefully at least some of you enjoy seeing them. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask. And as always, have a science-tastic day.